everybody. Welcome to Inspiring Adventures. It's Tuesday night, it's 6 o'clock, so it's time to talk. Welcome to Inspiring Adventures with Miz Meliz. The bell is rung, it's time to start. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Melissa Reyes. Hi everyone, I'm Melissa Reyes and welcome to Inspiring Adventures with Miz Meliz. Today I have the pleasure of introducing you to a friend. Her name is Bridgette Alexander and she's the author of the Celine Caldwell mystery series. Celine Caldwell is a young girl and she has a incredible story, and she just comes to life in this book, Southern Gothic by Bridgette Alexander. And here she is. Hello, Bridgette.
Hi, Melissa. How are you? Hi, everyone.
I'm great. But catch me up on how you are. It's been a while since we've talked.
Yeah. There's been a lot going on. I guess there's been a lot, and then there hasn't been at the same time. So I've been working on the research for the second book. It's called Sons of Liberty. And that, again, with Celine Caldwell, takes her from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York to George Washington's Mount Vernon estate in Mount Vernon, Virginia. So back in the fall, I was there at the library at the George Washington Library, doing research and reading. Oh my God, I mean, it was the most incredible experience I've ever had, and I am not exaggerating. I got a chance to read a personal letter between George Washington and Martha Washington. These are rare because generally people during that time, someone like him or like a Ben Franklin or John Adams or Thomas Jefferson, their personal letters between them and their wives, they would burn. They would destroy them.
Oh, okay.
Because they kept it personal. So all of their letters between one another or between some other head of state, those they kept. But any letter, any written communication between them and their wives, they would destroy it. But this one, for some reason, was not destroyed. So I got a chance to read it.
That's so neat. Now, how did you come to have that opportunity? Was it because you're doing research, or is that in the museum or on display?
No, it was because I was doing research on Sons of Liberty, and I needed to. Or I shouldn't say needed to as much as it was more my wanting to go to Mount Vernon the book is about, so Julia Caldwell, because this is where the problem always starts with Celine Caldwell, mounts an exhibition at the Met called Sons and Daughters of Liberty. Mm-hmm. And in this exhibition, she, for the first time, and this is partly what I'm going to be doing in the book, profiles, or at least opens the visual dialogue of other people that were involved in the early parts of the militia groups that were resisting the British Crown, that ultimately led to the big skirmish, which is the American Revolution.
Okay.
So in this exhibition, you see portraits of African-American men, African-American women that were part of both the Sons of Liberty and the Daughters of Liberty. You see Native American, you see a lot of women. You find out that you see images of homosexuals that were a part of the Sons and Daughters of Liberty. And for me, it was really important to be able to expand this narrative of U.S. history because it is very inclusive. It's just as our country is right now. It's not a country that was built by and for only one group of people and one gender. It was built for and by all of us. So to be able to go, and I conducted about 3 years worth of research on this, even while I was writing Sons of Liberty. I'm sorry, while I was writing both of them, but
right.
while I was doing the final edits, and even before I was doing the final edits on Southern Gothic, I was starting to write Sons of Liberty. So I learned that there was an African-American man, Joseph Allicock, who led the New York Sons of Liberty. George Washington, one of his valets, Mr. Lee, was helped him start up the Virginian Sons of Liberty. And Martha Washington had Mrs. Lee, who was the wife of Mr. Lee, as a part of the Daughters of Liberty. And also included in that group of women were Betsy Ross, Abigail Adams. There was a lot of women that we're not aware of at all. I mean, some of them we know for sure, but we know them only as in these very passive roles, and that is not what they did. My going down to Virginia, to Mount Vernon, Virginia, was to be able to validate some of the claims that I was making, particularly with George and Martha Washington. I was able to do that. And also to be able to see how life was for very early African Americans in a time of slavery in this country, how their lives were living on Mount Vernon.
Yeah. Now, can I ask you, what are the claims you're making, and are you making them through the eyes of Celine, who's the teenage young adult in the book, or her mother, Julia?
Well, the main claims are being made by Julia, and so the claims that I'm making is pretty simple: that there are women of color, men of color that are also participating in the establishment of our country, and that were also involved with the militia groups, and that were also later, I don't spend any time talking about the American Revolution, but that were involved in the American Revolution. So this is the time period, at least in terms of the focus of Julia's curatorial project, is looking at this moment right before the American Revolution. And so the claim is that it is inclusive. There are men of color, there are women of color that are also participating in this time period.
And is that something that comes to as a shock or a surprise to Celine in this time now, or is
no, it doesn't.
What is it?
It doesn't. I mean, I think most kids, if you're attending a private school in the United States like Hamilton Day School, and I base Hamilton Day School on the University of Chicago's laboratory school. This is the same school that our former president, Barack Obama, daughters attended. So if you're attending lab school, or if you're at Trinity, or if you're at Dalton, and both those schools, both Trinity and Dalton, are in New York City, they're sitting in Manhattan, you're going to get a very rigorous education. You're going to be told, you're going to learn history. That may not necessarily be the case for public schools, and I'm not quite sure on public schools, since it's been decades since I've been sitting in a public grade school or a public high school.
Based on what?
But I know when I was in high school and when I was in middle school, I did learn history. So for me, it wasn't a surprise to know that. For Celine, it's not a surprise. For her, what happens in the story is that there is a lot of protest that's going on outside the museum. And there is a person who gets into the museum, to the exhibition space where Sons of Liberty is being is on display inside of the Met, and threatens to blow it up. So that's where Celine comes. That's partly where she comes in. She's there in the museum when this happens. And so you get to hear her understanding of what this country is. And this is a person who's very privileged, who is very well educated, 16 years old and lives in a very different world that most of us we don't live in. And then you have her mother, who's an art historian, who sees the world as well as the United States through a lens of visual culture. So even that is a very distinct and very different way to view the country.
Yes.
The bomber, is a very typical American who feels left behind, left out. We've heard a lot of this since the election. I mean, even during the electoral the election season, we heard a lot of this, and which probably led us to the person that's now sitting in office. But people feeling like they no longer have claims to the country. So you hear his voice,
sure.
You hear a voice from Celine's voice, and then of course you see Julia's voice around you.
Now this is this is a young adult book.
Yeah.
This is a lot to take in for me, thinking, this is our future. You're molding the minds of our future. You're giving them this information, this knowledge, these tools to shape what their impressions are going forward, because they're educated, they're understanding. Because I feel like what I know now is what I really understood at that age. Mm-hmm. I'm so impressionable, such an impressionable age.
Yeah.
Yet, of course, with knowledge and wisdom and experience, but still it's that seed of knowledge that you're giving them, and you're giving them so much perspective, the mother's perspective, the daughter's perspective, even the freaking bomber's perspective.
You need to hear his perspective, because it's, everything is pretty complex. So even as an African-American woman, going to George Washington's Mount Vernon and spending time on his farm, because he didn't refer to it as a plantation.
No.
He didn't.
I've been to Jefferson's. That's what is that?
Oh,
Monticello. So I've been there, which is the only thing I can relate to.
Yeah.
Is that similar?
It's very similar. Very. I mean, Jefferson, of course, just had a lot more wealth. So his is going to be a lot more sprawling and just magnificent.
Okay. All right.
And George Washington didn't have as much money as Jefferson. His is very modest. I mean, you do see. I mean, that's what I love about him. Spending time on Mount Vernon and getting to know George Washington, not as a one-dimensional image on a dollar bill,
right,
but as an actual living, breathing human being, or at least someone who was living and breathing at some point in time. And when you understand that, part of what that means is that this is another human being who's thinking, who's breathing, who's interacting and engaging with other human beings that look very different from him. You begin to understand his ideas on enslaving other people was as complicated as all the other founding fathers were. It wasn't this notion that you're Black, you're inferior, so therefore you work for me for the rest of your life.
It wasn't.
That's not what was going on.
Yeah. I know your time is limited, and we're with you for a few more minutes, but I've got a couple of questions that come to mind that I just have to ask.
Oh, sure.
So, I've been so influenced in my life, and I work at a middle school, so I'm, around young teenagers, and my kids are young, and older now. But they're so enamored with Hamilton and the success of that play, and the music and the history behind it. And we're really thankful that that's come to light. And I don't know, how much of what they're learning is what you're finding out there in your research, but how has that influenced you in this?
Well, it actually hasn't. I'm probably one of the few Americans or few people on the planet that have not seen Hamilton.
Okay.
I mean, it's pop culture, and I totally respect it. I think it's utterly necessary, and it has done a lot in order to expand people's understanding of it. But
opening up a conversation at the very least with your teenager about American history.
Yes, I mean, it's important to be able to start to even have that conversation, but it just hasn't influenced my work because I'm by training, I'm a historian.
Yeah.
So I'm always living, you know, in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries and trying to understand from that perspective with the sensibility of someone living in the 21st century, having to live in a country that's post-slavery, post-civil rights, even though we still have a long way to go with women's rights, but we are still living in a post-women's rights country where we are at least able to vote, have jobs, have, you know, make changes, reinvent ourselves.
Make choices, and we talked at length about the choices we can make now and why, and how it's still not easy and will never.
No, it's not. It's not. We still have a long way to go. But the fact that you can even make the choice, the fact that you even have the mindset, because if you can't do something, you're not going to even have the thought that you can actually do something.
Right. Well, because we did this a little backwards, could you just tell me a little bit about your background, your education, and what your plans are for going forward with your
well, as I mentioned earlier, I'm trained in 19th century French art history at the University of Chicago. I initially started as an undergraduate at Columbia University, and I studied art history. I spent close to 20 years working as a writer of art history, a curator, an art educator. I've worked at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Guggenheim, the Whitney. I've worked with the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. I've worked I did research at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris and also at the Louvre. I've worked I was a part of an international curatorial team with the House of World Cultures in Berlin, Germany. So I have done, I think, like almost everything in art history and in the art world. In addition to working, having a business as an art advisor where I've worked with corporations and foundations and the ultra wealthy, high net worth people, and helping them to build their art collections.
So after exhausting all of that and absorbing all of that art history throughout the world, Bridgette decided to write her stories of Celine Caldwell and pitch this story to not one, not two, not three publishing companies, but how many?
You know,
how many times did you try to get this book published?
I had to start with an agent. And so I ended up pitching it to like 96 agents and got turned down 96 times.
Oh my God. You're 96 times. I was going to say 40. I thought it was 40, but
no, it was a lot.
This is a woman who never gives up.
No, in fact, can I tell you something? With every no I got, I mean, and the initial shock was always like, oh, how could they say no? This is such a good story. It's a really good story. And then I'd say like about 15 or 20 minutes later, oh, it's just because I don't have a second book. I need to write a second book. I need to write a third book. Oh, I need to write a screenplay. Oh, I need to write a treatment. Oh, I need to write a Bible for this. And so it just kept growing and growing and growing.
And Celine has more followers than I do on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. And so, you know, and she's this persona, and you've built this whole world, and you still ended up starting your own publishing company.
I decided to start an imprint, because I figured I need to get it out. I mean, there's one thing that I cannot do, which is to literally print up a book. And so I thought, well, I'll just start a business. I've done that before. So I would get the financial backing. I would hire a really good publicist, and I would build I would build an infrastructure.
So, amen. Thank you for doing that, because I feel like that is part of the journey of why you inspire me and so many people, and why I want everyone I know and everyone who knows them to meet you. And we're going to continue to follow you on your inspiring adventure, because now everybody, can I tell?
Yeah, go ahead. Yes, please.
I just found out that the next part of Bridgette's journey is that she's going to law school, and she's going to be a lawyer. And so, you know, she can't stop this.
Yeah, I'm going to continue
So
working.
big that she just has to keep trucking along.
Right. I do. I mean, I'll continue with the Celine stories. I mean, because I love them so much.
I can't.
And I started doing that because I wanted to create sort of like a bird's eye view, or bring you into the world that I've seen for so long. And not a lot of us are in that world. You know, it's not regular Americans like you and I that are there. I mean, that's a world that's kind of shut off from us. And I wanted to break those walls down, and that's what Celine does. But, you know, I reached like 51 last year, and I just felt like I've just exhausted everything. And what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And in fact, it was worse than that. I couldn't see a life past last year. I just really saw nothing. And I started thinking, you know, what was the one thing that I always wanted to do that I thought I wasn't smart enough to do? And it was to become a lawyer. And I said, I'm going to go to law school. And then I figured out after
My dear, months, you do not have to. Why? Why do you have to do that? I mean, I'm thrilled because she's considering having her practice here in Southern California, and we'll get to hang out together. But because I'm so selfish, so I know I'm not coming to Chicago anytime soon, but you don't have to get a law degree to hang out with me. You could just come and visit. What you're doing is so wonderful. What is it in you that needs to do this?
There is something. It is just, I don't know, and I'm having
it's a good thing that you're doing.
Yeah. Well, because I've always wanted to contribute to mankind. I know that sounds really corny.
No.
But I don't want to leave this world without having to really make it better. And so it's not just the practice of law, it's going into the area of biosciences and biotechnologies. And this is with stem cell research and stem cell development, and helping the human body and helping us to live longer and healthier. And I want to make sure that that's available to all of us, not just to those that's sitting at the very top, but that all of us have access to that. And I'm just driven. I mean, I look at it and I think this is what I will be doing for the next 50 years, Yeah. And I am excited.
That's amazing. So it's an interesting angle. You could become a doctor, or you could become a research scientist, or you could become a philanthropist. There's a lot of ways you can help people with stem cell research, but you chose the law.
I chose the law because that determines whether if any of us get it.
That's right.
If you've got a patent on something and it's only going to a specific, if a pharmaceutical company has it and they're only giving it to a certain hospital or a certain research lab, how are you and I going to get it? How will your grandma get it? How will your brother get it? He's not. He won't even be aware of it. I'll be able to make him aware of it and make sure that he gets it.
I want a button that says Bridgette Alexander for president.
Oh.
God, you're so amazing. Okay. Now, ladies and gentlemen and children and everybody who's watching this, because everybody's going to see it. I can make sure I see everybody to see you and find out what you're doing and get your books. Because if it's just getting inspired by a Celine Caldwell mystery, that is one way to find out how a person can come from adversity and hardship and a crazy backstory of what you went through to who you are today.
Yeah.
Anybody can get this kind of an education and
Yes.
do all of the things that you've done. So I know, you don't have time to go there, but no matter what you're going through or no matter what you've been through, you can rise up and you can.
Yes, absolutely.
So
absolutely.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This was wonderful.
You're wonderful. I'm just so happy for you. And it's like I want to equate this to a Dan Brown book because it's a mystery. It's exciting. It's interesting. It's clever. And Bridgette takes you to these places. And if you haven't traveled, you can travel through this. And if you, it's mature enough for the person who has traveled and been to these places and who has been educated in the history. Of course, she's a historian and an art historian, so you will love it. Absolutely love it, and it's an easy read too. So because it's a teen young adult novel. So anyway, I can't wait for everybody to talk about it. I'm going to post this in my group, A Year in Bloom. I want everybody to know that no matter what you're going through, this can be your healthiest, happiest, and best year ever.
Absolutely, absolutely. I believe that 1,000%.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We'll hear from you more. I'd love to have you back.
I would love to be back.
And keep studying. Keep
I will.
Make it out here to LA.
I know, exactly. I have a place to get to.
Yes.
Okay.
And we'll see everybody next time on Inspiring Adventures. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much, Bridgette.
Thank you, Melissa. Bye, everyone.
I love you too. Tell me about her book, which is called Dream Big. Welcome to Inspiring Adventures. Advocate of kindness yourself. You have to learn yourself first.
Otherwise, you cannot.
You're talking about being kind to yourself. He has written the book True Love. This is the science, how to use science to understand love. I'm super excited tonight to introduce you to a good friend of mine